I remember the night it happened with a clarity that still grips my chest, as if the storm never truly ended, and the sound of rain against my windshield never stopped echoing in my ears. I was driving home from the late shift, exhausted and tense, pushing my old Ford pickup through the twisting Montana mountain road while trying to ignore the way the wind shoved at the truck like a frustrated giant. Layla had texted me earlier saying her chest hurt again, and the small paper bag with her medication lay on the seat beside me like a reminder that every second mattered. The rain hammered the windshield in endless sheets, and the wipers fought a losing battle as I leaned forward, squinting into the storm, telling myself to just get home, just get to my sister, just keep the wheels on the road. But fate had other plans, and they revealed themselves in the form of a flickering headlight twisted sideways on the shoulder up ahead. A black SUV had slid, or been forced off the pavement, nose first into a shallow ravine, steam rising from the crushed hood, as if the vehicle itself were breathing its last breaths. I hit the brakes before I even knew what I was doing because some instinct older than fear told me someone might still be alive inside, and I could not, in good conscience, drive past without checking. When I stepped out, the wind punched into me with freezing force, and rain soaked through my jacket in seconds as I slid down the muddy embankment toward the broken window. Inside, a woman lay slumped over the airbag, her hair matted with blood, her breathing faint and uneven, her fingers twitching as if she were trying to hold on to something only she could see. I touched her shoulder, and her eyes cracked open, barely conscious, and she whispered words so fragile I almost thought I imagined them. "Do not let them find me." My stomach dropped as I looked up and saw headlights far up the road, pausing for only a heartbeat before speeding away into the storm, as if whoever was inside wanted to be sure the SUV stayed hidden in the dark. That was the moment fear crawled up my spine and common sense begged me to walk away, but something deeper, something shaped by every failure and regret I carried, refused to let me abandon her. I smashed the rest of the glass with my elbow, forced the door open with my shoulder, and pulled her free, her breath warm against my neck despite the cold. By the time I hauled her into my truck, my hands were numb, and my heart was pounding so hard it felt like part of the storm itself. But there was no turning back anymore. I did not know her name, her story, or why someone wanted her dead, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty as I slammed the truck into gear and tore away from the wreckage. I thought I saved a stranger, but I had just stepped into a war. The road ahead twisted like a living thing, and every flash of lightning revealed another stretch of empty asphalt that felt more threatening than the one before it. I kept glancing at the woman beside me, her breathing shallow, her lips turning pale, and I knew that whatever danger had forced her off the road was not finished yet. The storm raged harder, urging me forward, pushing me toward a fate I had never asked for tonight. Before that night twisted my life into something unrecognizable. Things were simpler, though. Simple never meant easy. My days started before sunrise in the small, drafty house Layla and I rented on the edge of town, a place where the floor creaked in protest with every step, and the heater rattled loud enough to drown out your thoughts if you let it. I would pull on my coveralls, swallow a cup of coffee that tasted more burnt than brewed, and head to the garage I ran on the outskirts of Willow Creek. It was not much to look at, just a corrugated metal building with faded paint and a flickering neon sign that spelled out Carter Auto when it felt like cooperating, but it was the one place where I felt competent, steady, and needed. People brought their cars to me when no one else could figure out what was wrong. It was a reputation I had earned piece by piece after years as a mechanic in the Army's search and rescue unit work that had shaped me in ways I still carried in my bones. I had seen men survive things no one should survive, and I had seen men die in moments when they should have lived, and that part of my past lingered behind every choice I made. It was why I responded to emergencies without thinking, why I could not drive past the SUV crashing into a ravine, why fear and caution never had the final say with me. Still, life after the military was not the triumphant homecoming people like to imagine. The bills piled up quickly, especially after Layla's diagnosis. She was only 29, but had the lungs of someone twice her age thanks to a medical condition that drained her energy and filled our mailbox with notices marked urgent, overdue, or final. I worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7, scraping together enough to keep the lights on and the medication coming. Even with the constant stress, there were moments that reminded me the world was not all weight and worry. Old Mr. Henderson would bring his pickup in every winter, claiming it was making a noise, though it never did. He just wanted someone to talk to for a while, and I never charged him $1. Mrs. Keegan, whose arthritis kept her from climbing her porch steps some days, once cried when I fixed her car for free, even though I knew she needed the money more than I did. Those small moments anchored me, kept me steady, even when life felt like a storm with no break in sight. People in town saw me as the dependable type, the man who helped everyone else but could not seem to catch a break himself. Folks at the diner would say things like, "Jonah is a good man, but unlucky." Or, "If anyone deserves better, it is that Carter boy." I never knew whether to take those words as comfort or pity. Maybe they were both. But the truth was that I carried a heaviness no one could see. 3 years earlier, during my final deployment, I had failed to pull a teammate out of a burning vehicle in time. The fire had moved too fast, the explosion too sudden, and every night since then the memory visited me in the dark, reminding me that sometimes you can give everything you have and still lose the person you are trying to save. That guilt clung to me like a shadow, shaping my choices in ways I barely understood. So, when I saw that SUV wrecked on the mountain road, when I heard the faint sound of a woman fighting for breath, something inside me tightened, something old and unresolved, and maybe I stopped because I could not bear the idea of failing again. Maybe I stopped because helping people had become the only part of my life that still made sense. Or maybe without knowing it, I was already caught in a story much bigger than myself. And if I had known what was coming, if I had known that saving her would pull me into a conflict simmering beneath the quiet face of this town, I wonder if I would have kept driving, or if I still would have hit the brakes. By the time I pulled into the emergency entrance, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely shift the truck into park. Rain hammered against the metal awning, as if trying to punch its way inside, and the wail of the storm almost swallowed my voice when I shouted for help. 2 nurses and an orderly rushed out with a gurney, their expressions shifting from confusion to urgency the moment they saw the woman slumped against my shoulder. I lifted her as carefully as I could, though her body felt limp and frighteningly light, and as we eased her onto the gurney, one of the nurses asked if she was my wife. "No," I said, forcing the word through my breath. "Just someone I found on the road." That answer made her pause, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she wanted to ask more, but there was no time for that. They pushed the woman through the sliding doors, calling out vitals and commands, and I followed until a nurse held up her palm, stopping me. "Sir, unless you are immediate family, you need to wait outside." I stepped back automatically, still soaked, still breathing hard, still replaying the image of the SUV crumpled like a discarded toy in the ravine. The doors closed in front of me and left me alone with the beeping machines, the antiseptic smell, and the echo of the woman's whisper. "Do not let them find me." I wiped the rain from my face, though my hands were so cold I could barely feel my skin. After a few minutes, a doctor approached, adjusting his glasses as he studied me. "You brought the woman in from the accident. You acted quickly. Another few minutes and she would have lost consciousness entirely." I nodded, unsure what to say, unsure whether I was relieved or still terrified. The doctor asked for my name, and for a moment I hesitated before giving him only my first name. Old habits die hard, especially when your instincts are shaped by years of military training, where caution was often the only thing keeping you alive. The doctor did not push for more. He simply said she was stabilizing, and that if her condition held, she would wake soon. I sat in the waiting room, dripping onto the linoleum floor, staring at the vending machine as if it held answers. I told myself I should leave. I had delivered her to safety. My responsibility was done. But something about the way she had grabbed my sleeve, something about her voice cracking with fear kept me glued to that chair. 15 minutes later, a nurse approached. "She is asking for you." I blinked, confused. She barely knew I existed. Still, I followed the nurse to a quiet room where she lay hooked up to monitors, pale but alive. Her eyes fluttered open when I stepped in, and for a moment she looked at me like she was trying to figure out where she was and whether she was safe. Her lips parted, and I leaned in to catch her words. "Tell my father I am sorry." The sentence was barely audible, but it cut through me like a blade. Sorry for what? Sorry to who? I wanted to ask, but her eyes were already closing again, exhaustion dragging her under. The nurse stepped closer and said her name, but the woman slipped back into sleep before either of us could hear it clearly. I stood there a moment longer staring at her fragile form, a strange mixture of protectiveness and dread rising in my chest. Something about all this was wrong. I could feel it deep in my bones the same way I used to feel danger seconds before it appeared during deployments. I knew I should walk away. I knew it. But as I stepped out of the room and into the hallway, the automatic doors at the end of the corridor slid open with a hiss, and a cold gust of air rushed past me like a warning. I left the hospital that night with a heaviness I could not explain, and a sense that whatever I had stepped into was much bigger than a roadside rescue. I did not know her name, her past, or her secrets, but I could already feel the story tightening around me. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Morning came far too quickly, dragging a thin gray light across the valley and prying my eyes open before I was ready to face the day. I had slept maybe 2 hours, if you could even call it sleep. My mind kept circling back to the woman in the hospital bed, her cracked whisper, and the headlights fleeing the crash site like a guilty conscience. I wanted to believe everything was over now that she was safe, but a gnawing tension in my gut told me otherwise. I was making breakfast for Layla when the sound started. At first, it was a distant vibration in the floorboards, a low rumble like thunder rolling across the mountains, but thunder did not grow louder in steady, synchronized pulses. Layla paused mid-sentence, her spoon hovering above her cereal. "Jonah, what is that?" I walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and felt my breath catch in my throat. A long line of motorcycles was pouring into our quiet street, their engines merging into a single roar that made every window shake in its frame. Not 5 bikes, not 10, not 50. At least 200 spilling around the bend like a black river of chrome leather and steel. Neighbors stepped onto porches with wide eyes. Dogs barked hysterically. Someone down the street slammed a door and locked it loudly enough to be heard over the engines. I recognized the patches immediately. Hell's Fire. One of the most feared biker groups in the Northwest. No one knew exactly what they did, but everyone whispered stories. Some said they handled security for dangerous people. Some said they cleaned up the messes the law would not. Some claimed they ran charities under the table. All I knew was that you did not want them looking for you. Yet they were. The bikes slowed in perfect unison, forming 2 long rows on both sides of the street, engines idling with a deep, steady rumble that made my ribs vibrate. Then 3 riders at the front cut their engines, and silence fell with an almost ceremonial weight. A tall man with a gray beard and a jacket covered in old patches approached my driveway. 2 others flanked him, their expressions unreadable under their helmets. I stepped outside before Layla could protest, wiping my hands on my jeans even though they were already clean. The man stopped a few feet away. His voice was deep-controlled, almost too calm for the situation. "We are looking for the man who saved Ruby Hale." Hearing her name spoken out loud hit me harder than I expected. Ruby. Finally, I knew what to call the woman I had pulled from the wreckage. I swallowed hard and forced my voice to stay steady. "I do not know who that is." The man tilted his head slightly, studying me. Behind him, one of the bikers held up something folded in his hands. When he opened it, my stomach dropped. It was the jacket I had wrapped around Ruby in the hospital parking lot before nurses rushed her inside, still damp in places, still stained with her blood. I had left it behind when the chaos of the moment pulled me away. The biker stepped closer and handed it to the leader, who lifted it carefully, almost respectfully. "This belongs to you," he said. His tone was not accusing. It was simply a statement of fact. My mind raced, looking for an escape, a lie, anything that might give me a second to breathe. But running from 200 bikers was not a realistic plan. When the leader extended the jacket toward me, I felt something shift, a subtle tightening of the air around us, the moment when fate stops giving you choices. The man's eyes hardened just enough to reveal the truth beneath his calm. "Boss wants to see you, and he does not like waiting." Every neighbor on the street had gone, still watching from behind curtains or cracked doors. Layla stood at the window, fear written plainly across her face. I wanted to comfort her, to say I would be fine, that these men had no reason to hurt me. But even I did not fully believe that. The leader nodded toward one of the bikes. A gesture, not a request. The engines behind him revved in unison, the sound rolling through the street like a warning. In that moment, as I stepped forward, jacket clutched in my hand, I understood something clearly. Saving Ruby Hale had not ended anything. It had only lit the fuse. And now the explosion was coming straight for me. They put me on the back of one of the bikes, though no one grabbed me or threatened me outright. It was more like standing in the middle of a tidal wave and realizing fighting it would be useless. The rider in front of me grunted for me to hold on, and before I could second-guess any of this, the engine roared, and we shot forward, swallowed into the moving wall of bikes. The ride through the mountains was a blur of twisting roads, pine trees bending in the wind, and moments where I swore we were leaning too far into a turn to survive it. The entire formation moved as one, like a single massive creature made of steel and thunder, and I had never felt so small inside something so loud. After 20 minutes, the convoy turned onto a narrow road I had driven past a dozen times without ever noticing the gate hidden behind it. The gate was tall, reinforced, and guarded by cameras that tracked us as we approached. One of the bikers punched a code into a rusted metal box, and the heavy doors slid open with a grinding sound that sent a chill through me. Inside was not what I expected. Instead of some lawless den of chaos, I saw order. A courtyard lined with workshops, storage buildings, and rows of meticulously maintained bikes. Men in leather jackets carried toolboxes. Younger members cleaned parts. A few dogs wandered around freely, stopping to greet riders like old friends. It felt less like a criminal compound and more like a rough, self-sustained village. They led me into a warehouse converted into an office. The inside was spacious, with warm lighting wooden beams, a long table scattered with maps and photos pinned to corkboards. At the far end stood a man in his late 50s, tall, broad-shouldered, with streaks of silver in his beard and eyes that carried too much grief to be hidden by the hard exterior. Victor Hale. I knew it was him before anyone said a word. He dismissed the others with a flick of his hand, and they filed out quietly, leaving us alone in a silence that felt as heavy as the storm the night before. Victor stepped closer, studying me like someone trying to understand a puzzle whose final piece does not quite fit. "You pulled my daughter out of that SUV," he said. Not a question, a statement carved from something deeper than gratitude. I nodded, unsure how to hold myself under that gaze. "I found her on the road. She would have died if I had not stopped." His jaw tightened. "She almost did. Twice. I told her she should stop going out alone, but Ruby has a way of believing she is invincible." The name sounded different coming from him, sharper, more fragile. Victor turned and pointed to a board covered with newspaper clippings and photos of women's shelters' court cases. "Ruby runs a program for women escaping abuse," he said. "She gets them legal help, safe housing, protection. The work pisses off all the wrong people. That crash was no accident." My stomach twisted. I remembered her whisper, "Do not let them find me." "Someone forced her off that road," Victor continued. "Someone wanted her dead, and you, Jonah Carter, were the only person who stopped." He stepped closer, the weight of his words pressing into the air between us. "You saved my daughter, and when you saved her, you saved me." Grief cracked his voice for half a second, just enough to reveal the wound beneath. "Ruby is all I have left in this world, and someone tried to take her from me." He looked at me long and searching, as if trying to see what kind of man fate had delivered to his doorstep. "You acted when most people would have driven past. For that, you have my respect, but respect comes with responsibility. His next words landed like a hammer. You are now part of this, whether you want to be or not. A shiver crawled across my shoulders, because in that moment I realized something Victor was not saying aloud. Whoever tried to kill Ruby would not stop just because she survived, and they would not hesitate to silence the man who saved her. I left Victor's office with my thoughts knotted so tightly I could barely breathe. The ride back to town was quieter, the bikers no longer rumbling like a storm, but escorting me with a strange, almost reverent distance, as if I had crossed some invisible threshold I still did not understand. When they dropped me off at the hospital, one of them simply pointed toward the entrance and said she is awake now. That was all. No threats, no warnings, just a statement heavy enough to make my pulse spike. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed softly, far too calm for the kind of chaos churning inside my chest. The nurse at the desk recognized me and gestured toward a hallway. "She has been asking for you," she said. Her tone was gentle, but her eyes searched my face as if she could sense the storm following me. I walked down the corridor, each step making my heart beat harder. I did not know what I would say to her or why she would even want to speak to me. All I knew was that the closer I got to her room, the heavier the air felt. When I pushed the door open, Ruby Hale was sitting upright, her hair slightly damp from a recent cleaning, her eyes unfocused until they found me. The moment she recognized me, something in her expression cracked open a mix of relief and emotion so raw it made me look away for half a second. "You came," she whispered. Her voice was still fragile, but there was strength threading through it now. I stepped inside, unsure how close I should stand. "Victor said you were awake," I replied. "I wanted to check on you." She let out a breath, the kind that carried the weight of everything she had survived. "Last night I thought I was going to die out there." She paused, swallowing hard, and then I heard your voice. You have no idea what that meant. I shifted uncomfortably, not used to someone looking at me like I had done something extraordinary. "Anyone would have stopped," I said. The words felt thin, even as they left my mouth. Ruby shook her head. "No, they would not have. People saw the Hell's Fire patch on my jacket and assumed I was trouble. They always do. You saw a human being bleeding in the dark. Not a label, not a rumor. Me." Her eyes filled not with weakness but with the kind of emotion that came from being unseen for too long. I opened my mouth to answer, but she reached out first, her fingers brushing my wrist. The touch startled me more than I wanted to admit. "I am sorry you got dragged into this," she said. "You did not deserve any of it, but I am thankful. More than I can say." I sat down slowly, the chair squeaking under my weight. "Why would someone want to hurt you?" I asked. She took a deep breath, her gaze drifting toward the window as rain streaked down the glass. "Because I fight for people who cannot fight for themselves." Her voice steadied, growing stronger with each word. Women running from violent homes, girls who have nowhere else to go, mothers who would be dead if they stayed. The men hurting them do not like that I interfere. The silence that followed was thick, pulsing with a truth I had not expected. The headlights fleeing into the storm, the SUV forced off the road, her whisper begging me not to let them find her. All of it suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. Ruby looked back at me, her eyes full of something fragile and fierce. "When you pulled me out of that car, I thought about letting go. I thought it was over. But then you kept saying, 'Stay with me, stay awake, keep breathing.' You saved me, Jonah. Not just from the crash, from giving up." The room felt too small, too quiet for the weight of her gratitude. I did not know how to hold it. I did not know how to tell her that I was no hero, that half the reason I stopped that night was because of a ghost from my past I could never outrun. But before I could speak, she squeezed my hand, a quiet, grounding gesture that sent a strange warmth through me. "You saved my life," she said again, "and I do not forget the people who saved me." Those words should have comforted me. Instead, they felt like a promise carrying more danger and more hope than I was ready for. And for the first time since the crash, I realized I was no longer standing at the edge of this story. I was already inside it. I expected the world to go back to normal after leaving the hospital, but normal was already gone, replaced by something heavier, sharper, and impossible to ignore. The next morning started like any other. I brewed weak coffee, checked on Layla, and tried to convince myself that the hellish roar of 200 engines and the weight of Victor Hale's stare were just leftover fragments from a nightmare. But reality has a way of refusing to stay quiet. Around 9 o'clock, a single motorcycle rolled into the driveway, its engine rumbling like distant thunder. I stepped outside, expecting tension, expecting some new threat, but the rider simply handed me a folded slip of paper and nodded toward the road. "Follow," he said before turning his bike around. Something in his voice, calm but final, told me that whatever waited ahead was not optional. I locked the door behind me, told Layla I would be back soon, and got into my truck. The rider led me through the winding mountain roads until we reached a clearing I had never noticed before. There, spread out across a wide stretch of dirt and pine, were dozens of Hell's Fire members busy assembling something that made my breath stop for a moment. A garage. A new one. Huge, steel-framed modern with a lift system I could only dream of affording, and enough space to repair a dozen vehicles at once. I climbed out of the truck, slowly half convinced this was some elaborate hallucination. Victor Hale stepped out from behind a stack of tool crates, his presence pulling every biker into silence as if gravity itself bent around him. "Jonah," he said, walking toward me with steady steps. "You look confused." I stared at the massive structure rising from the dirt. Confused does not cover it. He gave a small, almost tired smile. "Good men rarely expect good things. Let me show you something." He led me inside the half-finished garage. Every corner gleamed with new equipment. Welders, tire machines, diagnostic tools, things I had only seen in catalogs and dismissed as impossible dreams. A brand-new red pickup sat parked near the far wall, polished so clean it looked like a commercial image brought to life. I turned to Victor, stunned. "I cannot accept this." His expression didn't change. "You can, and you will." I shook my head. I did not save Ruby for anything in return. "I know that," he said quietly. "That is why you deserve it." He motioned for me to follow him outside, where a long row of steel file boxes sat stacked on a makeshift table. Victor opened one and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of Layla's medical bills, the ones that had been piling up in our mailbox like threats. I felt my chest tighten as I scanned the first page. Paid in full. A lump formed in my throat. Victor placed a hand on my shoulder, not forcefully, just enough to steady the weight of the moment. "Kindness should not punish a man," he said softly. "It should raise him." The sentence hit me harder than I expected, as if someone had finally articulated the thing I had been starving for all these years. I looked around again, struggling to breathe. "Why are you doing this?" Victor's gaze darkened, but not with anger, with understanding. "My daughter has been fighting monsters for years, Jonah. You stepped into the dark and fought with her for one night. That makes you family." I looked down, overwhelmed, unable to find the right words. But Victor was not finished. "There's a price," he added, though the word did not feel like a threat. "Not for the gifts, for the truth." He walked a few steps away, staring out at the tall pines. "Ruby is not safe, Jonah. The people who tried to kill her know she survived. They will come again." His next words pressed a cold weight into my spine, and they know someone pulled her out of that car, someone who saw too much. I felt the world tilt slightly. "Are you saying I am in danger?" Victor turned to me slowly. "I am saying you are no longer invisible." A silence settled between us, heavy but honest. I did not want the garage. I did not want the truck. I certainly did not want to be pulled into the crosshairs of men who ran women off the road in the middle of a storm. But then Victor spoke again, softer than before. "I cannot undo what happened to you overseas, Jonah, but I can tell you this. Saving my daughter was not a failure. For the first time in years, I felt something inside me loosen, something I had carried silently since the day flames closed in on a man I could not reach. I did not expect the emotion that rushed up inside me. I turned away, but it was too late. The tears came hot and uncontrollable, pulled from a place I had locked away so tightly I thought it had died inside me. Victor let me stand there without shame, without comment, just a quiet presence beside me until the storm inside me passed. When I finally caught my breath, he placed something in my hand, a small metal emblem shaped like a flame curled around a shield. The mark of Hell's Fire, members who had earned the club's trust. "You are not alone anymore," he said. "Not in this fight, not in this life." In that moment, the price of all he offered became clear. It was not money or loyalty or obedience. It was stepping into the light after years of living in my own shadows. It was accepting the possibility that maybe, just maybe, my life was allowed to rise again. I should have known, good fortune never arrives alone. It always brings a shadow trailing behind it, something cold, and waiting ready to collect a cost you did not understand when you first accepted the gift. The new garage went up faster than I could wrap my mind around it, a steel and concrete miracle that drew attention from half the county within days. At first, people pretended to be impressed, offering awkward congratulations, while trying to figure out how a broke mechanic with overdue bills suddenly had equipment better than the dealerships. I could feel their curiosity scraping against me like sandpaper, but I tried to ignore it. I told myself the storm had passed. I told myself life was finally turning. I should not have been so naive. The shift started quietly, the way winter sneaks into Montana before anyone is ready. Conversations stopped when I entered the diner. Neighbor kids who used to wave now stared from behind their parents' legs. Someone spray-painted biker pet on the back of my mailbox. A morning news segment aired a story about motorcycle groups expanding influence in rural communities. They used footage of men wearing jackets just like the ones Hell's Fire rode in on. My face grew hot as I watched it, a sick knot forming in my stomach. People did not know the truth about Ruby's work, or Victor's grief, or the brawl she was fighting to keep women alive. They only saw leather jackets, engines, tattoos, rumors whispered for decades. And now they saw me standing among them. At the grocery store, Mrs. Keegan, a sweet older woman I had helped for years, placed her basket between us like a shield. "Jonah," she said quietly, "I heard things. I do not know what you are mixed up in, but please be careful." Her voice trembled, not with judgment, but with fear, and somehow that hurt more. I wanted to explain, but where would I even begin? I saved a woman in a storm, and now her father's entire biker brotherhood is rebuilding my life from the ground up. You can imagine how well that would go over. The worst moment came 2 days later when I overheard Mr. Dawson, the high school football coach, talking with someone near the hardware store. He said my name with a disgusted huff and added, "That boy's selling his soul to those bikers. Mark my words, he's bringing trouble right to our doorstep." I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly, letting the words sink in deeper than I wanted to admit, but the final blow came from someone I never expected. Sheriff Murdoch. He showed up at my garage right as I was finishing an oil change, his cruiser pulling into the gravel with the weight of a warning. He stepped out, hat-tipped low face, unreadable, except for the tension sitting on his jaw. "We need to talk, Jonah." The sheriff was a reasonable man, one I had known since I was a kid. Seeing caution in his eyes made my stomach twist. "Word is spreading fast," he said. "Folks are worried. 200 Hell's Fire riders rolling into town is not something people forget." I tightened the rag in my hand. I did not invite them. I did not ask for anything. I was just trying to help someone. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know that. But people do not care about the truth. They care about the stories they tell themselves. And right now you are the center of one they do not like." He left me with a look I could not decipher, somewhere between sympathy and warning. I locked up the garage early that evening, my chest heavy. When I arrived home, Ruby's car was parked outside, her silhouette visible through the kitchen window. For a moment, guilt and anger twisted inside me before dissolving into something softer. She had come because she knew. She felt it. I stepped inside and Ruby turned, worry etched across her face. "They are turning on you," she said quietly. I nodded, unable to pretend otherwise. Ruby stepped closer, her voice steady, even though her eyes shimmered with something I refused to interpret. "I am sorry, Jonah. You saved my life, and this is the cost." I looked away, fighting the frustration boiling inside me. But she reached out, touching my arm gently, grounding me in a way that made my breath slow. "You are not alone," she whispered. "Not anymore." Her words did not erase the town's fear or the anger building around me, but they carved out a small space of solace in the growing storm. And sometimes that is all a man needs to stand back up again. Trouble never announces itself politely. It slips in through the cracks, rides the wind, waits for the exact moment your guard is down. For days after Ruby's visit, I tried to focus on work, forcing myself into routines that once gave my life structure. Changing brake pads, rebuilding carburetors, ordering parts. Anything to drown out the feeling that eyes I could not see were watching from somewhere just beyond the tree line. The town's distrust had hardened into something colder, something that tasted a lot like resentment. But even that was nothing compared to the deeper tension settling in my bones, a quiet warning humming under my skin. It started the afternoon the power went out at the garage. 1 second, the lights were buzzing overhead, the radio crackling with classic rock, and the next everything snapped into silence. I walked outside and saw nothing but stillness. No wind, no birds. Even the clouds seemed to pause. That was when I noticed the tire tracks in the dirt road. Fresh, heavy, not from any vehicle I recognized. My heart sank. Before I could step back inside, a black SUV turned the corner and rolled slowly toward my property. Its windows were tinted so dark I could not see silhouettes inside. Every instinct from my military days flared to life. I backed up toward the garage door, reaching for the wrench on my workbench. When the SUV stopped in front of my shop, the passenger window lowered a few inches. A man's voice drifted out smooth but sharp like glass hidden inside velvet. "Jonah Carter, you have something that belongs to us." My grip tightened around the wrench. "I do not know who you think I am, but you should leave." The man chuckled a low sound that made my stomach twist. "You saved the Hale girl. That makes you part of the problem." The door opened and a man stepped out. Leather jacket, clean-cut beard, a smile too calm for someone delivering a threat. Behind him, 3 more doors opened. 4 men, all armed, all confident. I took a slow breath. Whatever happened next, I had to protect Layla. The man took a few steps toward me. "You should have stayed on the road that night. You should have kept driving." He snapped his fingers. In an instant, another SUV I had not seen approached from behind my garage. They were flanking me, cutting off escape. One of the men reached for the pistol at his hip, and then everything exploded into motion. A roar of engines erupted from beyond the ridge. Dozens of motorcycles surged over the hill like a tidal wave of steel and fury. Hell's fire. Their arrival hit the air like a thunderclap. The armed men spun around, startled for the first time, their confidence cracking as 200 engines descended on them. I had not called for help. I had not warned anyone. Somehow, they knew. The lead rider braked hard in front of me, dust swirling as he pulled off his helmet. It was Cole Ruby's closest guard. His eyes were blazing. "Jonah, get behind us, now!" I backed up as the bikers closed ranks around the garage, forming a wall of bodies and engines between me and the men who had come to finish what they started on the mountain road. The leader of the armed group cursed under his breath, signaling to his men. "Fall back. We will deal with this later." They retreated quickly, but not fearfully. Their eyes told me this was not over, just postponed. When the SUVs disappeared down the road, the tension finally cracked wide open. Cole turned to me, fury and worry tangled across his face. "You were almost killed. Why did you not call?" I swallowed hard. I did not realize they would come here. Cole shook his head. "They are black vultures. They come wherever they smell blood, or fear, or opportunity." He stepped closer, gripping my shoulder. "And now they know you matter to Ruby. That makes you a target." The words settled over me like ash from a fire. A target. I had gone from anonymous mechanic to someone worth hunting. More engines rumbled behind us as the victor arrived, his expression dark enough to chill the air. He took one look at the skid marks the SUV tracks the shattered piece of my garage and spoke in a voice carved from ice. They crossed a line. No more warnings, no more mercy. I felt the weight of his words settle into my bones. The fight that had started on that stormy mountain road was no longer just about Ruby. It now included me. And the men who had come today would not make the mistake of underestimating me again. Ruby arrived at my house that evening before the sunlight fully faded behind the mountains, as if she had been holding her breath until she could see me with her own eyes. I had swept the broken glass from the garage floor, but the tension still clung to the air like smoke thick enough to taste. When she stepped out of her car, the first thing I noticed was the worry etched around her eyes. Worry so sharp it looked like it hurt her to keep it inside. She walked toward me without hesitation, stopping only when she was close enough to search my face for injuries. "They told me what happened," she whispered. Her voice trembled not with fear for herself, but with fear for me. I wanted to tell her it was fine, that I had handled worse, that I had survived firefights overseas that made this look small. But the truth was standing there with her watching me. None of those old stories felt like armor anymore. "I am okay," I said, though I wasn't sure whether I said it for her or for myself. She shook her head, stepping closer. "Jonah, you were my target today. They went after you because of me, because they know what my work means, and because they know what you mean to my father now." I felt something tighten in my chest at the weight of those words. What I mean to him, what I mean to her. I tried to brush it off, tried to ground the moment in logic. Why are they so determined to stop you? What did you do that warrants this kind of violence? Ruby took a shaky breath and leaned against the hood of my truck, the same truck I had dragged her into the night I pulled her from the wreckage. "You have to understand something about the world I live in," she began. "It is not simple, and it is not clean. When people think of domestic violence, they imagine private fights, isolated homes, small tragedies hidden behind doors. But it is bigger. It is organized. It is profitable. The men hurting women are often connected to each other, to larger networks, to people who do not want anyone interfering." The more she spoke, the more I realized how naive I had been. Ruby was not some pampered biker princess wandering into danger. She was a woman standing between victims and the men who owned them like property, and the world she fought inside had sharp teeth. It started with one woman. She continued, her fingers tracing the metal edge of my truck absent-mindedly. She came to me, shaking, terrified, covered in bruises. I found her a safe house, helped her file charges. But the man she escaped from was tied to black vultures. They sent messages, warnings. Then they started coming after the women in my program. And after me. I swallowed hard. That crash was not an accident. Ruby's eyes darkened. "They tried to run me off the highway 2 weeks ago. I outran them. This time they boxed me in. If you had not stopped Jonah, I would be dead." The silence after that felt heavy enough to bend metal. She looked up at me, then really looked, and her voice dropped to something soft but stronger than anything she had said before. "You saw me when no one else did. Not the jacket, not the rumors. Me. And that is why you are in danger, because men like black vultures thrive on fear, on silence. You broke that silence." She reached out her hand, brushing mine. The contact was light, a whisper of warmth in the cold evening air, but it shot through me like a pulse. I was not prepared for the tenderness in her eyes, or the gratitude, or the guilt. "I do not want you to hurt because of me," she murmured. "You have already lost too much in your life." Those last words hit something buried deep, something I never talked about, something I thought I kept hidden. My breath hitched just slightly, and Ruby caught it. "You are not the only one who carries ghosts, Jonah." She stepped closer, her voice steady now, filled with quiet conviction. "But hear me. What you did on that road was not a mistake. You chose humanity over fear, and men like the vultures cannot stand that. When she said that, something inside me settled. The fear did not disappear, but the shape of it changed. I was no longer afraid of being targeted. I was afraid of failing her. Again, she placed her hand over mine. You matter in this, Jonah, whether you want to or not. And for the first time since the crash, I understood the truth. Saving Ruby had never been a single act. It was a doorway, and I had already stepped through. A year can change a man in ways he never expects, and looking back now, it feels almost impossible to believe how different my world was before the night I stopped on that mountain road. Seasons rolled across Montana like slow-moving tides, washing away fear and replacing it with something sturdier, something I had not felt in years belonging. The garage. Hell's Fire, built for me, stood tall and polished against the horizon, no longer a symbol of suspicion, but a lifeline for countless folks who could never afford dealership prices. Veterans drove in from neighboring counties because they heard a mechanic who understood their battles worked here. Single mothers came because Ruby's foundation had helped them get back on their feet, and they trusted her recommendation. The Fire and Mercy Foundation, the nonprofit Ruby and I launched together, grew from a folding table in my garage office to a full building downtown with volunteers lined up outside every Saturday morning. People came seeking safety food, job guidance, or simply someone who believed they mattered. I watched women who once hid behind fear now stand tall while holding their children's hands. I saw veterans who arrived hollow-eyed now, laughing with the men fixing brakes beside them. Every transformation reminded me of the night I climbed into that broken SUV and pulled Ruby out, not knowing I was stepping into the greatest redemption arc of my life. Even Willow Creek, once tight-lipped and suspicious, began to soften. The same neighbors who crossed the street to avoid me now dropped off pies or asked about their carburetors. The man who painted Biker Pet on my mailbox showed up one morning with a bucket of paint thinner and a shaky apology. People did not change overnight, but they changed slowly, honestly, the way winter melts into spring. Sheriff Murdoch, who once warned me that stories mattered more than truth, now helped us run safety workshops at the foundation. He even admitted one afternoon, leaning against his cruiser, that he had misjudged the entire situation. Jonah, he said, watching Ruby speak to a group of young mothers, the town needed a wake-up call. You and that girl gave it to us. Layla's health had improved too. With her medical bills wiped clean and her medication covered by the Foundation's new health program, she no longer looked haunted by the weight of survival. She worked part-time as an administrative assistant at the Foundation, her laughter echoing through the halls like music I had not heard since before our parents died. Seeing her smile without flinching felt like watching the world tilt back into alignment. Victor visited often, though age and old wounds slowed him a little more each month. He never admitted it out loud, but I could see the pride in his eyes whenever he saw Ruby speaking in front of a crowd or me walking through the garage with grease on my hands. One afternoon, as we stood outside during the grand opening of the Foundation's new shelter wing, he placed a hand on my shoulder with a grip that carried both strength and fragility. You are the son I never expected. He said, his voice lower than usual, and Ruby is alive today because of you. I shook my head, but he tightened his grip. Do not argue with an old man who knows what gratitude feels like. When Ruby approached, sunlight catching the red in her hair, Victor stepped aside, leaving us standing together in a silence that felt warm rather than awkward. She looked at me with that familiar blend of determination and tenderness, the same expression she wore the day she told me I mattered in a fight much bigger than both of us. You built something here, she said softly. Something good, I corrected her gently. We built something. She smiled, and that was enough. As the crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, as the engine rumble of Hell's Fire rose in the distance like a protective chorus, and as the town that once feared us now stood shoulder to shoulder in unity, I realized one simple truth. Saving one woman had changed the entire trajectory of my life, but what followed had changed the trajectory of an entire community. And for the first time in years, I felt not just useful or needed, but whole. Sometimes I stand outside the garage at dusk, watching the sunlight sink behind the mountains and listening to the low, steady rumble of bikes rolling down the highway. A year ago, that sound meant danger. Now it means family. It means protection. It means the strange, unpredictable ways life can break you open and rebuild you stronger than before. I think back to the night everything changed, the night I should have kept driving. Rain slashing across the windshield, thunder crawling across the ridges, my mind crowded with worry for Layla. I had 100 reasons to stay in my lane and pretend I saw nothing. But there was one reason I stopped. A voice inside me I thought had died years ago whispered, "Someone needs you." And that voice mattered. It still does. If I had driven past that SUV, Ruby would not be alive. The foundation would not exist. Women who now sleep safely with their children would still be trapped in fear. Veterans who finally found work, community, and purpose would still be wandering alone. And a town once divided by suspicion and judgment would still be hiding behind closed doors. Every life connects to another in ways we never see coming. One choice, one stop. One act of courage can ripple outward farther than you could ever imagine. For years, I believed my life had plateaued into something small and unremarkable. A garage that barely stayed open. Medical bills stacked like quiet accusations. A heart carrying the weight of a man I could not save overseas. I thought I had missed my chance to matter, but the truth is that purpose does not arrive on schedule. Sometimes it finds you in the dark when you are exhausted, discouraged, and convinced you are alone. Sometimes it looks like a broken woman whispering for help. Sometimes it looks like a moment you could easily ignore. Ruby once told me that monsters thrive in silence in the places where people look away. And she was right. The moment you refuse to look away, the moment you choose kindness instead of convenience, you start to change the world in ways that challenge those monsters. You make yourself visible. You make hope visible, and hope spreads. When I see Ruby now standing at the front of a room full of women who no longer tremble when they speak their names, I am reminded that strength is not loud or violent. It is steady. It is relentless. It is the quiet choice to do the right thing when no one is watching. And when I see Victor weathered by grief, yet softened by gratitude, I understand that even the hardest men are shaped by love more than fear. As for me, I finally understand the lesson life was trying to teach me long before that stormy night. You cannot save everyone, but you can save someone. And sometimes saving one person is enough to shift the entire axis of your world. Looking back now, I realize I did not just save Ruby. Ruby saved me too. She saved me from believing my life was too small to matter. She saved me from thinking my past defined my future. She saved me from the quiet, suffocating belief that redemption was something reserved for better men. So, if you are watching this wherever you are, hear me clearly. Do not ignore the small moments. Do not underestimate the power of stopping when someone else keeps driving. You never know whose life you are stepping into. You never know whose life you are saving, and you never know how deeply that act might transform your own. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of the strength inside ordinary people, or if it stirred something you forgot you had, then I want to ask you a question. Who can you stop for today? Who needs your kindness, your courage, your willingness to stand still in a world that keeps rushing past? Leave a comment. Share your story. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this one, hit follow so these messages can reach the next person standing at their own crossroads. Maybe that person is you. Maybe it is someone you love. Either way, remember this. The smallest brave act can change more than one life. Sometimes it can change an entire community. And sometimes, without warning, it can change you.